Good morning, everybody. My name is Jose Fuentes, and I am privileged, actually, to share some ideas here with you, along with distinguished Professor Bilal Moss and Brendan Morris. The three of us have been working on issues related to diversity for a long, long time. Evidence of that is the gray hair that we carry, our mustache, and the rest.
Equally understand.
Exactly. And I want to kind of share with you some ideas as to where we are these days in this country when it comes to having a diverse workforce. And I will share with you some statistics to reveal that in this country, we really have a serious problem of having a very diverse workforce. But more importantly, I want to share the message with you that the minority serving institutions are the ones that we need to target with future investments to make progress, because in the last many years, despite excellent programs such as the one that NOAA has, we haven't seen much progress. And so I want to share with you with these statistics that you see here. Please focus on the right-hand side first, because that tells you what the ethnic composition of the country is. Roughly white men and white women represent, as of the survey that we did in 2019, 60% of the population. The census 2020 reveals that that number has changed a little bit. So Hispanics, African Americans, then represent both, roughly the rest of the population. And then go to the left diagram for a moment and see how the statistics compare. In the case of women, white women, according to this data, 2019, 17% of them were involved in science and technology. That's what the S and E stands for, okay? But that number actually has dramatically changed due to the pandemic. And in the case for Hispanic women and African-American women, those numbers have been more dramatic. And so from this diagram, what you can deduce is that we have a serious problem in this country. And the reason is that the demographics are changing. Here's another diagram that Brendan Morris and I have put together as part of a committee that we share at the National Science Foundation. And if you look at the blue bar, that tells you the percentage of public school students enrolled in the K-12 system. In the year 2000, children from the white community represented 61%. And then the rest were the Black, the Hispanics, African Americans, and Native Americans, and the Pacific Islanders. But what I want you to draw your attention to is the fact that by the year 2027, the kids in the K-12 system will only represent 45%, and then the rest of us. And I want to focus your attention on the Hispanic, because that's the group that is growing very rapidly. So roughly speaking, by the year, in 5 years, our kids in K-12 will be mostly from diverse backgrounds. But if you look at the composition in science, we don't really have that. And the National Academies produced a report in 2019 that said that 38% of the STEM workforce in this country is trained at minority serving institutions. And what I want to share with you here today is that the federal government is not making investments that are commensurate with what those institutions are doing. And so let me kind of bore you for a little bit with some statistics, okay? So right here, I want to make the point that if you go to the HBCUs, and the definition of those acronyms are at the bottom of this slide, HBCUs, HSIs, and a new acronym I learned actually, ANAPC, which stands for Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institutions. It's a mouthful, right? And so what I want you to really see is that at the minority serving institutions, percentage-wise, we have more science and engineering students. How about that? We are really doing fine there. So if I take you to the next one, the next information that I want to reveal with this slide is that our minority serving institutions are indeed very diverse communities. Have a look at all these colors are here for the white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Native, and other races. But if you look at the Hispanic serving institutions, for example, they almost represent what the nation is ethnically. And so I would say to you that we better pay attention to this when we are designing the future investments in science and technology in this country. And here are the numbers that reveal the statistics that I shared earlier with you, where we have the total completions in science and technology versus non-science and technology. At the minority serving institutions, we exceed 20% of the graduates. Whereas, on the non-minority serving institutions, the percentage is around 22. So I think this gives evidence that we really need to pay attention to this, and we need to make investments in these areas. And just to satisfy the curiosity of my co-author the most, I want to share these statistics here that comes from the National Science Foundation, that when you look at the training of African-American doctoral students, most of them come from Howard University, this university, Hampton University. When you compare those with the universities such as Maryland, Michigan, Virginia, Harvard, Berkeley, they actually are down below. So they are not performing at the same level that our minority serving institutions with doctoral degrees actually produce. And so there is a disconnect here, because on one hand, we have that our STEM workforce presently receives most of the training at minority serving institutions. When you look at the investments of the federal government agencies such as the Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, NASA, Department of Education, and Department of Agriculture, percentage-wise, those institutions receive a minuscule. I have done a lot of work for the National Science Foundation, and so Vernon Morris. We spend enormous amounts of time providing guidance and advice. What does NSF give to the HBCUs in this case? Because this is only for the HBCUs, 1.8%. That's not sustainable. We need to do better than that. And here's another statistics that show the graduate students supported by federal government agencies. I already defined the agencies earlier. And you can see that NIH is the agency that, of course, provides more support for graduate students, because simply they have a larger budget, right? But one disturbing fact that you can deduce from this figure here is the downward trend in the support. That is not good, particularly if we as a country are saying we need to have a diverse workforce, and furthermore, we need to have a competitive workforce. I have a mentor, the former NSF director, Rita Caldwell, who argues we cannot leave 50% of the team out for a game that we want to win in science and engineering. And that's what we're doing in this country. And I want to highlight this fact that my co-author, Belaida Morse, came with this morning, that if you look at the graduate fellowships that NSF provides, only 0.41%, nine graduate fellowships went to African-American recipients. That's not sustainable. That's not sustainable. And I want to kind of tell you that programs such as the ones that NASA has been funding are making a difference. Vernon and I are always telling NSF, look at what NOAA is doing. Use us as role models for you to basically scale up these experiences, NOAA. This one here is for the current NCAS that we have. We are training about 107 students. Now, if you multiply that by 5 centers that NOAA has, that could potentially make a dent. I think this is a very important fact. And I need to share the idea with you that my co-authors and I are saying that there is no reason why the field of atmospheric science should not be very well, or should not be diverse. The reason is, I think as the previous speaker eloquently conveyed, we have an enterprise that affects everybody. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, that activity of weather forecasting or whatever will affect all of us. And additionally, I would say that we have the most beautiful instruments, technologies to engage the students here. This is what we do at Howard University, at the Bellsville facility that we have at Bellsville. We bring balloons. We ask people to do things. And look at this diagram here. This is something that we learn how to work together in this country. And so we have done a lot of important things at Howard University. We think that we have done a little bit of work to contribute to having a workforce that is more diverse. And also we have contributed to some extent to some of the leaders. We saw one earlier today. You probably recognize this leader here. Is now the director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So I think if we continue with these efforts, we will actually accomplish something. So this is the message I want to take home. I'd say that the US population is continue to become diverse. And this demands that we need to have a workforce that resembles the composition of the country. And I also want to impress upon you that the minority serving institutions represent vital resources to grow and advance the training in the STEM workforce. And also the minority serving institutions can help address the nation's STEM workforce supply and demand. I am very convinced of that. And I want to really say this again, that we are very excited about the work that we're doing through these centers. And I wish to thank NOAA for the support, and also to all of you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Got a couple questions? Yes.
As we were coming up the other night, we had the opportunity to talk about this, and I did ask you at that time if you would give us your 3 wishes. If you could do 3 things to make a difference in this, what were your 3 suggestions?
My 3 suggestions will be that all of you, especially the ones who are in the decision-making process, please remember the following. This is a huge country, 330 plus million people, 5 centers. It's not really adequate. It doesn't matter how productive we are. We need to do better than that. So the other idea that I would recommend is that we really need to ensure that the other agencies follow suit as NOAA has been doing. We cannot just leave it, to one agency. And if you look at in the scheme of things in terms of budgets, right? NOAA doesn't get the budget that NIH has or NASA. No, we need to demand more from those agencies. And the third thing I would say to you, let's from whatever angle you want to view this, whether it's from the angle of fairness or otherwise, let's do meaningful investments in the minority serving institutions. I visit many universities throughout the country. And when I come back home, I have to tell you, I feel extremely sad because I visit some universities that are struggling, really struggle. They struggle with resources. And think about research, right? I work for Penn State that has a very sophisticated infrastructure to support research. Go and visit sometimes Virginia State University and learn if they have that infrastructure that I enjoy at Penn State. They don't. So we have these inequalities, and the way to resolve those inequalities is through meaningful investments, not tokenism or something like that. Those are my 3 ideas that I will share with you.
So I do think that it's very important when we have this accessibility for students going into college and university, but I'm curious what you would think the solution would be looking at a more K-12 stance, because I think it's important to be able to inspire these minority and diverse students in K-12 so that they can think that they can have those positions.
Vernon Norris, Lyda Moss, and I spend a lot of time that we don't account for when we go to visit the middle schools. There is plenty scholarly work that points to the fact that people decide what we want to go and study in college, in middle school. So we need to go back there and target the middle schools, the high schools. And when Bilal and I go out, Bilal brings little lasers to play with the kids. I bring my tether balloons, But the thing is that we are only very few bees out there working on this. We need more bees, you know. We need to have more hives everywhere in the country so that we can really make a difference. And the issue is, you know, and I want to speak for my institution, Penn State, you know, it's only very few people. Very often it's just us, the underrepresented colleagues, you know, who end up doing the work. No, everybody. We owe it to the country. We owe it to the future generations. So I would say to you, that's something we need to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One last question, then we gotta move on.
I have a question. You mentioned that the NSF has not increased their budget for minority institution or a graduate program. And you are part of the committee that you advise NSF or other ones.
Yes.
Just putting everything on NOAA, I mean, I agree, it doesn't work. Other agencies, they have to, you know, increase their budget to support MSIs for the STEM. Why they don't listen to the advisory board or the science? What are the challenges?
That's a really good question. And I would say to you that at least I would like to speak about NSF because you mentioned NSF. The problem is that we don't have many people within NSF who share this vision that I just shared with you. So this is the value, you know, of diversifying the workforce within the agencies. So we don't have many, can I use the word allies within NSF? You know, and that's part of the problem. And I would also say to you that sometimes people often, especially these days in the latter few years, people have been bringing some legal, you know, arguments to this conversation, and for that I think we really need to get our Congress involved, regardless how effective they are these days. But they are the ones who make allocation of funds. I think if they say, look, we cannot really tolerate this, that the NSF only gives 1.8% to the minority, but in this case the HBCUs. No, we all contribute to that budget that NSF gets. We pay taxes too. So we need to go back to the political system and say, look, this is the reality that we have, our communities. Tell us what you're doing for us, the communities that are impacted by all of this, right? But more importantly, they need to take this long-term view and vision that this impacts the well-being of the country. We cannot, on one hand, argue we need a competitive workforce, and yet, as Rita Caldwell says, we will leave out 50% of the population out. We can't. Yeah. Thank you so very much for your attention.
I know that it's